My name is Michelle Anstein, and I'm the Chief Program Officer of the Delaware Historical Society and Director of the Reed House and Gardens. And I'd like to introduce sort of our cast for today. We'll start with Dale Friends, Principal and owner of Friends and Friends Restoration Architects, and Bill Schoenlein, Construction Manager, and Chris Capaldi and Efrain Matos, carpenters for J.S. Cornell and Son. We're very pleased today to be able to provide this Windows workshop as part of our Save America's Treasures preservation program here at the Reed House to stabilize really the exterior envelope of the house. Our project includes various different items, masonry, roofing, flashing and caulking, exterior trim, painting, gutter repair, but we very quickly found that the one part of the project that has created the most impact in many different ways for us here at the house is working on our historic windows. So what I'd like to do is turn over the floor to Dale to really talk a little bit about the window project here at the Reed House.
Thank you, and I just learned what my topic is. but if I could just give a little bit of an overview about window restoration in general. Every historic building owner has to make decisions about how to address their historic wood windows, and we'll just limit our discussion today to double hung windows because that's what all the buildings or all the windows on this building are, and most of your windows are probably double hungs as well. But and technically they're double hung vertical sliding sash windows. They're not double hung windows because they're not. The sashes are hung, not the windows. But you know what I'm talking about. But in regard to windows, there are different points of view and there are different needs based on user needs and on the place of the building. Here we have a National Historic Landmark, and so the sole purpose of the Reed House surviving today is as an art object, as part of our surviving material culture, to provide information both about art and architecture and also about social history, the Reeds and the Coopers and the Layards who lived here. And so the rules become very narrowly defined for us. Our goal is to preserve as much of that original house as we can, sometimes even to the compromise of other things, like perhaps spending more fuel than otherwise we would in your own house. In this building, if you look at the front openings, you'll see that the sashes have been removed, and that we have temporary sashes so that they can be worked on in a shop on a bench under controlled conditions where they can be laid horizontally, where paint won't flow downhill, and for other reasons. But on this building, there was a goal to improve the thermal performance of the building, or of the windows. Also to improve the light transmittance performance of the windows. We of course, as one always would, considered exterior storm windows. The windows on this building are really known for their monumental, their large-scale simplicity, and putting a single pane storm window or even a wood storm window divided into multi-lights on the outside would change the reflective character of those windows and would change the understanding of the building from the exterior. And so that was ruled out. We then said, okay, what are the interior storm options? Our interior storm options are really severely limited by these wonderful interior shutters that actually fold back into recesses in the jambs. And so there's no room for an interior storm panel in between the outside face of the shutter stand and the inside face of the glass. the Reed House actually almost solved the problem for us in that 99% of the time, these shutters are closed. And so by being closed, they're actually taking the place of a storm panel. They're providing that second layer that creates an airspace that reduces thermal gain or loss through the windows. Some of the windows have an ultraviolet light and UV filtering film on them. When we're finished, all of them will have film, so that artifacts will at least be protected from UV light. But because the shutters are open so little, the issue of visible light is not so important. That is, we're not trying to reduce the light level in here because we reduce it by means of the shutters rather than by means of a tinted film. And you've probably seen windows with tints in them. They certainly improve solar performance. They're especially good during the air conditioning season. And the most offensive ones are the most effective, and those are the reflective ones, and so that's the challenge of a building like this. In your own home, you have other options. You could consider an interior storm window that either is ventilating or not ventilating, depending on whether you open windows. But you do have to keep in mind that when you put in an interior storm window, that you're changing the environmental impact on the historic window. You're causing condensation to occur on the inside face of the prime window, of the outside historic window. And if you don't watch that, you can start seeing paint peeling, and you can start actually experiencing wood rot. And there have been a number of Tax Act projects where once those interior storms have been put in, nothing has been done for 5 or 10 years. And not only have the spiders moved in, but you can also see paint peeling, and so it actually increases the wear on the historic window. One other advantage that the Reed House has is that the Reeds don't live here anymore. And so they aren't sitting in this room in the evening reading the newspaper or a book. And so the temperature can be set for something that's reasonable for a visitor walking through, but not spending long periods of time either reading or at a sewing machine or whatever. And so probably the same amount of energy is saved by lowering the thermostat as would be saved by putting a storm window on the building. And that's certainly a factor, in your own houses as well when you're thinking about it, is that the cheapest way to improve your window performance is to lower the thermostat, because you're asking it to do less. You're asking those windows to do less. What we are doing, though, is structurally we're preserving the window frames and the sashes, and we're also conserving material where that is needed. There's some rot that's either being replaced by means of Dutchman or epoxy consolidants, which we're using on a very limited basis, which I think Bill will probably talk about later. And we're also improving the infiltration of the windows by putting in new weather stripping. And so any window has both an infiltration and a conduction loss or gain. And so if you can improve the infiltration, you're halfway there. When you put on an exterior 3-track storm, the first thing that you'll notice is that the windows aren't drafty anymore. But you could have actually achieved that by improving the gap between the sashes and frames. And so you don't have to immediately say, I need exterior storms in order to make these windows not so drafty. You can make them totally undrafty without doing that. What you can't do with weather stripping is create a second, create an airspace between the two sashes, create a second layer, in your wall assembly. You probably know from what you've read that uninsulated masonry walls that have plaster applied directly to the exterior or directly to the interior face of the masonry have really low U values, or rather R values. They're really they really just slow down heat traveling through. Here we actually have a third construction, and so that third construction gives a lot to this building in terms of mitigating exterior temperatures and heat and cold traveling through the wall assemblies. So I won't say anymore, but as the morning goes by, I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions. One of the great luxuries that you're going to experience today is one of the big mysteries with windows. How do those sashes ever get in there, and how do you get them out in order to work on? And that's what these guys will show you, among other things.
I'll set the stage to start and tell you that you'll have a lot of time while they're just working, so you'll be able to ask questions as we go. Normally, the first thing we do is we put up temporary protection to contain our dust. We don't have that up today, so you all can see. We have a system of spring-loaded poles that we can set with plastic that drapes around that we can get up against the ceiling and try and get a small area that we can confine. They have zippers in the plastic, or you can actually just kind of tape it in and cut it open. It's called a zip wall system. So generally, that's the first thing you would see us. We try and contain all our dust within the space. We also have a protection panel on the outside since we're going to be exposed to the elements. And we start out with one on the outside. We prep the window. It's going to be, and these windows are painted shut, probably maybe for 100 years the upper sash has been painted shut. So before we put protection over the outside, we just take a utility knife and we make a fine cut where the paint line, where the sash meets the casing, or in this case where the caulk was caulked around that joint. And then we take a very thin putty knife and we use just a thin, flexible knife. This is one of the best tools we've found, and just go straight up in all the way around the sash from the outside. That frees up that paint bond, and so that when you come inside, you're able to slip them out. So that's basically the exterior preparation before we get going.
Hey Bill, if I could jump in here a minute. If as part of your rehab or restoration project, you're also doing masonry restoration, it's nice to do the masonry restoration before you break that paint bond, because you already have a good seal around your windows. And so, if you're thinking of sequence of work, do your messy outside work before you start taking apart the windows, if your sequence allows that. Sometimes it will.
And it was very effective here. It was very well sealed. So I'll let Chris and Ephraim start, and you guys can just start as you normally would go through. Now, I will tell you, we've opened this window up partially so that we know we can get it out. You're not going to have to watch us take out all the weather stripping or all on the sash. So I guess the first thing that occurs is, in this instance, is the pocket shutters, the hinges, the barrel of the hinges interferes with us getting the sash out. We know that from trial and error. So the first thing we'll do is we'll remove the shutters, and we found that in this instance we only need to remove the lower shutters. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then we'll be able to, lower slash will come out, the upper sash will slide down and clear the upper hinges. Now I can say that in our historic work, these screws originally were a straight slot. Today you go to a hardware store, you mostly find Phillips screws. We tried, that's one of the things that always shows in a historic restoration if you see a Phillips screw. It just jumps right out at you.
What did you have?
These are, well, there are many historic screws. Many of the screws here are original and have never been taken out. Where there's been repairs done, you're going to find a mix. And we discard those. So we try and start, now these have been cleaned up. The screws, often the heads are just completely filled with paint. We take a very fine straight blade screwdriver and just kind of go straight in on the end. You don't want to just kind of pound straight in on it and hope you can pound your screwdriver into it. You kind of cut and slide across it. And that actually takes, sometimes that's the longest thing we have to do here. For example, the pulleys, they've been in there for over 100 years. The back has probably never been out.
You can sometimes use a utility knife too, right? To
Right.
work from each end.
Right, but the key is to get that paint cut out, not to try and take a big screwdriver and force it in there. You want to see that slot completely cleaned out. And these actually have what's called a hand cut screw in some of them. We get them out and be able to show you some of those.
How much of a problem is it finding replacement screws that are the same head diameter as the historic?
It's becoming every day more and more difficult. You won't find the true value. Even looking on the internet, I had a very hard time. We found that boat supply. Now, a lot of times we're also using brass or bronze, and boat supplies are the one place where you can still get straight slot screws. There's an old hardware store in Philadelphia called them, and they have them still. But we're finding it very difficult to get them down. And some of these are actually hand cut screws, and they're very aggressive. So once you've got the screwdriver in that slot, a lot of times what we do is we take a hammer and we tap on it and just turn as we're tapping on that screw. That keeps that pressure in so you don't roll the edges of the screws. The screws up. As I say, that's going to cut. With that done, the next thing we do is there's an inner bead, which April's pointing to. That keeps the inner sash. That's the stop for the inner sash on the inside of the space. Between the two sash is another stop. It's a small 3/8 piece, and that's called a parting bead. We'll show you that in a moment. So the first thing we do is we take a knife and we cut the paint line. Anywhere we're removing an element that's a separate element that's paint, we try to take a utility knife and get a nice clean cut. It always isn't perfect. There's many, many layers of paint here, so it does chip, but it still does not down.
But the inside bead is sometimes called the inside stop, which is a good way of thinking of it functionally, because it's stopping the sash, holding it in place. And these windows have parting beads because they're more sophisticated or more complicated than a colonial window. Some of your houses have what are called plank frame windows, which means that the jambs are not hollow boxes like these are, but instead they're solid blocks of wood, solid boards. They would not have the parting bead, and the back side of what are called the meeting rails, the two rails, where the top sash and the bottom sash meet, just slide by each other. They're deep or rabbeted, so they interlock.
What year would your house have to be to have a window like that?
To have a plank frame?
Yeah.
Well, if you were in the country, it could be even as late as the middle of the 19th century.
Right.
But in a place like Wilmington or Newcastle, turn of the 19th century probably is, although, 1810, 1820 could still have a plank frame window.
Yeah, it kind of goes by the sophistication of the house. We have a combination of that back in the laundry, where we have a fixed upper and it's a plank frame, just a weird.
Hey, Bill, would you like to point out a few parts of window sashes, like rails and stiles and buttons
We can do that.
and
Put me on the spot here. Basically, in whether it's a window or a door in any molding element, generally the vertical element is the stile.
Guys, remember that stiles stand.
Very good.
Rails recline, right?
You could have, and the top and bottom would be a rail. So now, I'm going to further define that. If this was a door, that would be the top, that would be the bottom rail. In a window, we have a bottom rail, a top rail, and a meeting rail. Where these two windows meet, there's a profile, there's different profiles where they come together to lock. The old original ones. Now, these windows would not have had metal weather stripping when they were originally built. There just would have been a taper on the two sash, so when they came down together, they interlocked. And this top element is actually wider, it's probably 3/8 of an inch wider than the rest of the elements, so that they can get that taper cut into it. Yes, the button is the dividers for the glass.
Now, wait, excuse me, I've heard mullions, and muttons.
Very good, yes. What's the difference?
Are they all the same?
Well, I'm going to start, Dale, correct me. Mutton is what divides the panes of glass.
That's right.
A mullion would be the divider between units of windows.
Right,
We
exactly.
have quote twin windows, two double hung sash that look like they're contained within one frame, but they have a divider between the two. That is the mullion.
So what are we looking at
That
here?
is a mutton.
A month.
Muntin. M-U, two T's or one?
M-U-N-T-I-N.
Yeah.
Yeah.
M-U-N-T-O-N?
It's not like a stew, yeah.
Right.
It's not like.
Muntin, yeah. And then a mullion divides two windows, so if you had three windows in a row, you'd have two mullions in that assembly.
I got you.
Yeah, yeah. Or if you have a, well, we won't get into overlights and things.
Right.
Sometimes
You have overlights,
sometimes
sliders.
with mullions, yeah. Like a Dutch window, you know, on the Swanendahl Museum, those horizontals are also mullions that divide the lower windows from the upper square top windows. Those are all mullions.
The tracery in that, those are mullies to nails or something sheer.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I interject. We're at a stage where we are normally, now once the stop bead is off on the outside, we now get to the point where we're ready to actually remove the window in essence. Before we do that, we have this metal weather stripping. The metal weather stripping has a, you got that piece there, Bill. It has the weather brake, I guess, or whatever you want to call that right there. And that provides your seal, your wood end here on the sash is in there. So there's no way to just pull the window out. So what we have to do first is, there's nails. And if there was a smart person that was doing this, he's nailing one at the top, one at the bottom, with a possible third, and very easy to get to because this is slightly wider than the sash. We stick a thin knife in. Once you tap it, kind of loosens the nail head. We can get it, we can pull it. The problem is, that has happened on this one, is that there's been many nails, and sometimes on both ends and stuff like that. So there's a combination of not only getting the ones that you can get, but then you also have to stick in your knife and periodically shear the nail head to be able to get to the point where you can pull this. So that's where we're at right now.
When would those have been installed?
20th century.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
yeah, 20th century. Chris,
Yes.
could we back up and just, one of the most frustrating parts of a homeowner dealing with a window is getting out the inside stop without breaking it, because they're mitered at the top and bottom. And so how do you, and so they don't just come out. They need to be bowed in the middle, and then the nails, either you pull them out far, well, how would you tell? Go ahead. How do you,
There's a couple ways.
Yeah.
The key is everything is to not mar the surface of your work, to use the thinnest thing that you can.
but see the nail, there's a nail hole here,
Right.
there's a nail hole here, a nail hole here, there's one here, so there are a lot of them, so.
So what we do is, once we cut the paint, we take our putty knife and we get that in and we run it down it, and you can start to pry it out. Once that starts to happen, you can determine how it's fastened and where the fasteners are.
Yes.
And I guess we can talk about reassembly now, because that's part of the tech. Just like it's very crucial where you nail the weather stripping, the carpenters know that you don't want your last nail down here. You need to have your last nails up somewhat, because as Dale says, when you put the whole miter together, if there's a nail down here, you can't bow it up or slide it out. Now in those instances, this putty knife will shear a nail off. And we have several tools. Now this is actually a thick one. Chris has a bar that's probably half that thick. So we try and find all the thin tools. That's another one for the larger ones. And with this notch, that's what that notch will do. That will actually cover your nail. Now you have to know what you're doing to your woodwork so that it's tight enough that when it does that, it shears, it pops, and not does damage. Another thing we sometimes do is once you bow it out, you take this nail, this bar, and slide it against your nail. So
Or
a
against
quarter
the
inch
bottom
away.
of the nail,
Now you pop back in on this, you've held the nail and the nail head projects out through. Then
Where do you
you,
buy those? Normal hardware store?
yeah, any hardware store today.
And what are they
Now,
called?
it's a Craftsman series.
Well,
That's called a wonder bar.
This is a panel bar.
Panel bar.
Yeah.
Panel bar would be, it's a very thin bar. It's got this very thin hook here. A lot of times, once you get in, like with panel work, once you get in, you get behind it, you can, crank it almost, and so you're releasing stuff, or even in installation. Same thing with getting behind these stops and
The
stuff
key
like that.
is-
It's very similar.
Whenever you're using that to wedge or crank, like as he said, when he's cranking this way, you're putting a force, that edge is putting force against your finished woodwork. A lot of times, we'll slip our cutting knife under that. That's the whole key, is not to mar the wood.
Do you ever use a square mount channel lock pliers?
Yeah, we use an end.
Yeah.
We use an end. And they're specially designed that when you do this now, that's an edge. Now, it'll still mar the wood,
So you still
but it's meant to roll.
But it gives you a tremendous amount of leverage, so even if you put a steel putty knife against it, you got the leverage of just pulling it, as opposed to trying to prod.
And even hammers, a lot of hammers today have a straight claw. That's rolled, so that doesn't mar the wood. When you put a nail like that, or if you have a straight claw, the head's the first thing that comes into contact. So, yeah, there's a short nail. So sometimes what you can do is, if that nail is projected through, and I don't know, put that in there, there we go. Say it's tight, okay? Now, we pull it away from the woodwork a 1/4 inch. The board's out, but the nail's still held. You can grab that nail like that, press in against it, pop in the board, now you got the head. And you can pull it, roll it out.
You save all the historic nails and put them back where they came from?
Officially, yes.
Yes and no. Yes and no. The reality is that this isn't going to hold anymore if I put it in the exact same spot, the same nail, square hole, the way it works around.
But if you go to the Tremont nail website, they have some beautiful little finish nails that
Reproduction nails.
Even if you're not a purist and you don't want to use a wire nail, they do really well.
Yeah.
You know, if it's just for functional reasons, that's just, plus they're more fun, more satisfying to use.
Now, in this instance, we're going to be replacing most of the inner stop. It's been removed so many times in pieces that are bad. It's a kind of a call you have to make, but we've decided in this instance that we are going to.
And Bill, sometimes with a really heavy paint buildup, when you try to pop that nail back through, you'll get a giant crater that occurs, and so sometimes you want to just cut off the nail and leave the head buried in it and put it in a new nail.
With an antique nail, that's the only thing you can do is to cut it off. It's very hard to pull through. If you have any modern finished nail, we pull them through the back. With that same nail, you can just grab that nail in the back and roll, it rolls right through and you have it more.
Where do you find your stop at?
Pardon?
Where do you find you stop at?
Well, for historic homes, very rarely is what people are going to have it. We have mills that make it up. We, for many years, had our own shop at our company, and either have a collection of cutters or, for instance, on this job, this is a pretty simple profile, but we take our moldings, we cut a cross-section of it, and we have cutters are custom ground to those profiles. In a loose,
Do you have a recommendation where you can go? You can't really afford them all that. You
can go higher with the window.
well, if you can get very close to these profiles with router bits, with us, we want to be as accurate as we can.
Right.
If it causes an issue and you want to get close, you can buy router bits, and with a simple like 1/4 inch router, you can make most of these out.
The other option is if you go to a quality woodworking shop that does small custom orders, they probably have a cutter around that would be close enough to yours that it would be as good as anything, better than you could do with your own combination of routers and table saw and whatever. Also, have you had any experience with Hang lumber? They have a big, they're a Philadelphia area lumber company that has a catalog, and they have several profiles, like Harding Beach, you could probably get from them. But inside stops are so specific. They're typically a bullnose that has a little fillet next to it, and everyone is different. Everyone has a different leg. Sometimes, you can buy them, they might be 1.5 inches, and you have to rip them down to, 1 5/16 or something. That's really doable.
And even on beads, we're trying to get as much detail as we can. Modern cutters today, We have a bead,
So
the
we'll
flat.
put it on now.
These came together as a V-plane, so they're double hand
Uh-huh.
planes.
What kind of wood would you be using to replace?
For interior, we use poplar. You know, if it's a paint grade wood, we use poplar for party beads and stops is probably the most common thing today. All our exterior repairs are done with either a Spanish cedar or a mahogany. I don't want to say Honduras mahogany, but a South American mahogany. And that varies. Yes, Chris?
Well, I'm gonna say where we're at now.
Yeah,
Let's
it's
say where we're at
probably more important than where you're at.
Where we're at right now is we've released all the weather strip on the lower sash. We pulled it out, pulled the nails. We kind of ran through this before, so we didn't have as many nails. We were able to get the bugs out for you just a little bit, but at least on this lower sash, I don't think we did the upper sash, but so you might see us struggling a little bit more with the upper sash. But where we're at now is that there is sash rope. Sash rope are going through pulleys and tying to weights on the inside pockets of our windows, and we'll get to that in a few moments. But where we're at now is we have to remove the sash, and today you would see it screwed on, and you would see maybe even chains, but this was rope, and there's some finished nails in the ends. The trick is, once you release the rope, the weight of the sash is going to pull it down. We don't want to lose it, because periodically, and Bill said this to me, that I didn't realize, and I know you can lose the weight further down than you want, but Bill said that there has even been a time or two where he's encountered where the weight sash kept going and wound up on a house that had, say, siding, wound up coming through and breaking through on the siding or popping a piece of siding or something like that. So we really don't want to lose the sash excuse me, in the weight pocket, possibly where we can't get to the weights again. So the trick is going to be removing the sash, letting it up to a certain degree, re-nailing it for the duration until we get to actually removing the weights. So that's going to be our little bit of a dance here for the next few minutes.
Okay, now while they're doing that, I'll explain. If you were to just be taking the sash out, you did not need to replace your cords. You can take a finished nail and just put a finished nail through the cord. Some people don't like it, but that's generally how it was done. You can almost even twist it open a little bit. Get a 4-penny finish in here, and that'll keep it from dropping on you.
The other way of doing it is just to pull a wad of the rope in between the sash and the knot and put a knot in it, depending on your inclination. Yeah.
Can you tell from the rope, again, was this a 19 by 20?
This is all modern. Actually, we have a piece of very old cord. I don't know if I remember exactly where that is.
This is modern.
That open.
So the oldest cord would be cotton, and then the new cord, or the most recent cord, would be nylon or cotton sash cord. And if you go online,
Wouldn't be chain at all?
you can do chain. It's really an aesthetic issue, not only the noise of it, but also the appearance of it.
Generally, we saw it more when you get into the large monumental windows or institutional windows, when you get into these are 1 3/4 frames, in schools a lot of times it's 2 1/4 frame.
But there are plenty of windows this size that have,
Yeah.
there are plenty of houses with windows this size that have chains from the beginning. They're typically 20th century houses, you know, like if you were to go to Rose Valley or something, I think you'd find that most of those big houses there or in Westover, you know, the arts and crafts type ones are going to be chains.
Now, typically, the way this was originally done is there's a groove, a half-round profile, down the side of the window that lets the rope pass between the window and the jamb. And then bored into the side would be a hole. They would tie a knot and just pop that in there. Sometimes they tack it, but it really didn't have to be. The friction would keep it in place. These windows have been redone so many times, those holes are gone.
So just a plain old granny knot, just a single granny knot at the end, sometimes a double.
Now in here, they're just brads.
Yes. But that groove, that slot down the side is kind of what they call a dado, you know, and they plow a dado down the side. Do that. Can you show the other dado that was added there though, as well?
There
Yeah,
is,
see, there's a
there's,
thin one.
that's, now here again, this is modern weather stripping, and we're probably gonna end up having to cut these out. That's a little tough, but that's where we're at. So that's how that works, it just slid up and down from that.
So this is called interlocking weather stripping because the projecting fin on the weather stripping fits into a slot on the side of the stand. And so there's a physical barrier. With a casement window, you know, where you couldn't have interlocking, you had to use a spring. This thing should be- Yeah. And this is probably the best manufacturer
It's
for.
the only one I
Yeah,
have.
for its way of moving that.
Will you be talking about glazing over here?
Yes, Bill.
Well, we can get into that, we can answer all your questions while they're working. That was actually gonna be, I think, a separate workshop.
We're hoping that at some point, the Amstel House is going to be getting interior door windows, and we're hoping at that point to have a follow-up workshop there about storm windows and possibly even a demo of glazing there. But we can go ahead and answer.
Especially, I mean, a lot of us have old houses, and it's not completely glazing a window from start. It's usually half the glazing's there, half isn't.
Right.
How best to do that?
Well, here again, it's a little bit of trial and error. Especially with historic windows, you have to be very careful removing the glazing. Actually, if I had that sat back, I could show you another. This button, in general, you could say is a T-shape. And whatever its ornamental shape inside is, if I draw it just simply as a big box, it looks like that. And the glass sits here. This is called putty bar. In
Or a
these-
glazing bar.
Or glazing bar, yeah, wherever it is, have to different terms. Now, generally, now this is a very unique design with this nosed edge. Generally, you'll see it flat, and it can be anywhere from 3/16 to 3/8. The wider they are, generally you have an idea it's a newer window. So they're very narrow and very fragile. So you have to be just, the foremost thing is to be very careful that you're not prying against them or snapping them off to get the glazing out. I don't have the tool here. They'll actually kind of chided me until we bought one. Fine makes a tool that is an oscillating, it just vibrates back and forth, and it has a putty knife end. I don't know if we have a fine.
But the putty's on the exterior surface, right?
Yes.
Right, yeah, so you're working from the outside, yes. The key is, if you're just selectively replacing glazing, probably it's popped out, it's not so hard to get it out, so you just have to determine what sound, and then get it popped out. I don't have a scraper blade, but it looks about like that without a serrated edge. Vibrates at real high speed, does very little damage, so these are really great for removing glazing.
Now, should you put the triangles in to hold the glass where the glazings come out?
Yes, and there's all different kinds of glazing points.
And it depends on how much you're doing. If you're just spot glazing, you wouldn't need any points.
But the whole side is out.
Well, as long as it's captured.
Yeah.
I'll just go briefly,
Well, I don't, if this is off the subject, then we're gonna get another workshop, but I think
We're
that,
making mental notes.
that's a whole area of study with old houses that would be helpful.
and there's a lot of little steps in that, like the back putty and priming, that's very important. Well, let's continue through this, and we'll see how much time we have while
I've
they're.
got a question about the sash cord.
Yes.
Is sash cord a special material?
Yes.
Because what I got was a combination of synthetics, it's a nylon polypropylene rope that is nice and flexible in the right diameter, but is it too slippery? Are the nylon, is it gonna stretch?
Yeah.
How do you get that stuff out so easily? That's magic.
I think he worked on it.
This is it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You should hire a union. You
I'm gonna-
have to hire a union.
Not nearly that good.
He's really-
What happens is, this is our parting bead. This separates the top and bottom sash. You seal. And you have nails that go through
Hopefully, just
at
like
times, and hopefully.
Sometimes never.
there's-
Yeah,
Mine have
Sometimes
one.
never.
yeah, right.
But for the most part, everyone here has had nails going through it. And if they're smart, they only put a couple, one at the top and then one at the bottom. But what happens is we found that there has been more nails, and over time with the paint, being painted in and painted in and painted in, being able to remove it, as you can see here, there's been some split. So being able to remove it is very, very difficult at times, and you wind up doing a little bit of damage. So we're replacing with a parting bead.
It's not that, I'm sorry, it's not that vertical where the weather stripping kind of sat in that.
This,
Weather
no,
strip
it's
would've sat-
in this groove. It
It
actually
would have
just
been 90 degrees.
butted up to it, just touched it. So that's what, or in some weather strips do not actually come to it all the time.
Right.
They just are a little narrower. So,
Parting beads are not shot primed before they're installed. They're typically bare wood when they go into the dado on the side of the jam. And so if you,
yeah, as you can see, this was not one piece, so that was our difficulty.
for a homeowner, one advantage of making them making parting beads out of pine is that when you put them through your table saw, when you rip them, if you're making your own, you can slightly oversize them and then sand them for a good friction
Right.
fit, for each case, whereas the poplar's harder wood to sand, But it's really worth taking the time to have a good snug fit for those, because you really don't want to rely on those brads at all. Hold them in place. Sometimes they will blow a
And
bit.
that's one of the problems with mine, for example, here. You want to be so careful when you clean things out that when you're scraping, that you do not remove wood. In
Yeah.
other words, so in these are fine, they're only 1/4 inch wide, so we like to use a 1/4 inch chisel. We'll actually leave that piece in, when we're pulling them out, we don't worry so much about what stays in. You don't want to just dig in with a putty knife, you want to take a chisel and very carefully remove it, because you're relying on those two little 1/4 inch sides to hold it in. So, and some of these over time, that's why there's going to have to be nails.
This has been all the sash block that has been installed. Basically, it's blocking the upper sash from sliding down, and it's installed from the casing on the outside. It doesn't overhang it, obviously, so it's thin enough to just support the sash without, protruding.
So to carry that a step further, these sashes are not double hung, they're single hung, right?
They are double hung,
They're
they have
double hung.
stops.
Okay, but
For
they
whatever
have
reason,
stops.
but they're painted shut too, they weren't going anywhere.
But sometimes you'll find windows in which the top sash is held in a position by locking lights.
Case with the
Yeah,
laundry.
permanently,
So it's a
yeah.
single
That's what- In plank frame windows, they always are.
Our laundry wing is that way.
Okay.
Are all the nails out?
And then the bottom sash
There's all the nails are-
in a plank frame window is not
Okay.
counterbalanced, it's not hung. And so it's like a guillotine, if you drop it, it'll just slam down and either break itself or thunder it.
One of the things we found, sometimes in restoration, what you find is, well, everything we're working on has worked long enough to still be here, but you find things that also didn't work so well. A lot of stop blocks are just short, rounded ones, they don't come all the way down. One of the pitfalls of having these be continuous was another piece of wood on the exterior laid over another finished piece. We've got a lot of rot and deterioration in those pieces. And that actually trapped water, and actually at the bottoms, that's caused most of those windows that have these stops on, and you'll find deterioration around it.
I think this will be interesting for your knowledge. We're about ready to lower the upper sash. The problem that we have encountered was prior to the sash blocks being installed, which I think are much newer, they were both operational. The upper window and the lower window are operational. They were double hung, but the layers of paint underneath the newer sash block is at least an 1/8 on each side. And we sometimes felt that if we scraped all the paint prior to doing it, it created the ability to slide that window down a lot easier. And we started out with just a metal pull scraper, and after so much thick paint like that, you're just always constantly putting an edge on it, a little burr that allows the pull scraper to work. But then my friend Efrain here goes out and he one-ups me, and he goes out and he buys a carbide tipped, never to dull, ever, well, at some point it dulls, but carbide tipped, and if you're gonna scrape any paint anywhere, I'm gonna tell you, this is the tool to have, because this is, it attacks it, it really does, so, and it gets you right down to the bare wood.
And the key to scraping is really critical. You do not want to be digging or gouging the wood. And you want a nice flat surface. Sometimes you see these triangle point ones.
Three different sizes.
Yeah, if you're not careful, you can roll this edge right into the line and really dig it up. So you'll see the way they prepared that there. Still on a little bit of a primer show, but
And because it's lead paint, it comes off like that.
well, I think it's
Not because it's lead, because it's broken, because it's brittle. Just because it's a brittle alkali. Yeah, it has nothing to do with whether it's lead containing or not lead containing.
I mean, but wouldn't that paint logically be lead? I mean, at that point, of scraping, rather than
yeah, for the fact that some of these slight areas may be behind the other side. This house has been, for the most part, stripped since 1980. We have very little of this over here.
even that even straight?
The only place, the only caveats would be, for what we've seen so far, is upper sash. Yeah.
Usually paint removal.
It's, if you're trying to get a project done in a fixed time period, it's nice not to introduce wet chemicals, because then you have to wait for them to dry out. And so, if you can do it dry, it's better, but if you're having problems, then you have to go.
For the exterior, we are using chemical removers in some of the areas, but they require neutralizers, they need to be washed down. So when you get to the interior faces, it's problematic to neutralize it properly. So we've been scraping where that's.
So we're using peel 7 on the outside. You want to be sure to use the 7, not the 1, because the 1 is an alkaline product. 7 is solvent-based product, and so you don't have any issue with paint adhesion down the road. One thing that we didn't talk about was the sort of temporary facilities that they provided here. Notice how we built this box to sit on the windowsill. If you have a lot of windows, you're going to want to invest in these temporary kinds of things. The step in front of it, not only protect the window that you're working around, but make it safer for you.
And actually, we will sometimes drape plastic over it, because it is dusty and dirty, you're opening it up and cleaning them and opening it up. So you just try to keep the coming down that face. Now that is paneled there, so it'll usually be clean if it was a painted face. And then we also use this, there's a lot of radiators in front of windows. And everyone knows how hard it is to try to clean with one nose. So you try to cover the radiators.
If this were your own color, what you want to do, if you were doing a major window project like this, where you were replacing all the windows, you probably need to empty the entire room, close off the doors, and put an exhaust fan in one window so that you always have pressure. Yeah, so it's pressurized.
If you had to pull it out of place or the way you drop it into places, we would have to pull inner place. The pulley projects out through the opening. We know we'll be able to get a sleeve, or we think we'll be able to get a sleeve.
Well, I've only went so far with it. We'll see what happens.
But if you have any question about the age of your paint or the content of your paint, you should treat it as if it's lead. And either by using chemical stripper that can collect all of it and create no dust, or wear a respirator.
Pull it out.
And you know. It really wouldn't, you know, if you had a lot of windows, it'd probably be worth investing in a HEPA vacuum, you know, just to clean everything within it.
All right. Maybe come on.
The question about sash cords, does synthetic stretch too much?
Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't finish that conversation. The typical, well, I think the sash cords that you're using and that you normally see are a nylon cord, cotton cord.
It's a cotton cord with a reinforced nylon. And what we're using, the company Samson,
Yeah.
kind of the
Samson,
oldest
right.
name in cord. And I think they'll appreciate this. And one of the last ones, and I want to digress a little. A lot of times you'll see Samson makes what's called a slot cord, and it had a little diamond in it, and I think that was actually so people know that they weren't using cheaper cord, that it identified it as being a good quality. We're not using that, we're using a plain Samson cord, I think it's Athena. I called Samson and Samson cordage makes rope for barges and ships, and it really comes, all the cordage companies come from the shipbuilding industry. So I called them to find a local supplier of it, and I got a company up in Coatesville that's a wholesaler. And they said, yeah, we have it. And they said, what are you using it for? And I said, for windows. And they said, they still use it for windows? And so we sell it for clothesline, mostly.
All right.
So it is available, and it's sized by the 16th of an inch, so, or 32nd of an inch, I'm sorry, 32nd of an inch. So a 1/4 inch cord is a number 8. 7/32 is a 7. And you want the largest cord that'll fit within that pulley comfortably. So we think it's either 7 or 8.
Aesthetically, it looks best, and structurally, it's given you the
This is
most
the way
cord.
it works.
Yeah. You want the largest cord that you can, because it lasts.
What I was concerned about was with cotton, is it going to deteriorate again with time? Like
Well,
or
I would say, yeah, it will ultimately.
It's sort of a generational
Yeah.
replacement.
Yeah. And that's where the nylon reinforcement.
Yeah, yeah. Bill, maybe talk a little bit about, although maybe you get to that later, but very often you're removing a sash because the cord has broken, you know, and so, you know, measures to keep the cord in place are often irrelevant because they're already down in there, you know. But how are you holding that right cord right now, it's hanging loose there?
A nail and a nail.
Oh, a nail.
Upper area. Prior to the sash block, I think, what they did was they took extremely large finished nails, and you might encounter it, they nailed the upper sash each way. So, and after it being painted and painted, you don't even know it's there, and you're trying to pull the window down, and you know you cut the caulk, you just did it outside, so you're like, all right, what's going on? So,
how, from below?
yeah, toenailed in this way, and in most of them, they've been toenailed, you know, with 2 nails, so you think you're pulling one and you're good, and then you've got another one, so that becomes
So how
a
did you figure that?
struggle. After the first one.
Then we started to look. You start to look, and you look for dimples, you look for profiles where they may have been filler in the paint.
Yeah.
You start to rock the window, and you can see, okay, the window will move because the plating's head's
Yeah,
going
it's
to
moving,
move.
moving,
You
yeah.
start to narrow down,
Get
get
nothing
nothing
here.
here.
Then you can go in, and at times, we've had to try to shear them. Just go in, I mean, I ruined a few different, ones because you're hitting the nail, and you just destroy it. So, but you hit it, and then sometimes, once you hit it, you loosen the paint underneath, and you pop it, and you see, oh, that's exactly where it is. And then you can take a punch and punch it through your wood, okay? Until the point where, and you have to be very careful you don't split your wood, you know, especially if you're trying to restore things and make sure everything's good. And, you know, the least amount of repair you can, and then once you punch it through, then it'll drop. And then you can pull it out, and then you'll see the remains, like we just saw on our nails.
But these windows were designed such that when fully open, the two sashes would be in the middle, the top quarter and the bottom quarter of the opening would be open, so that you've got hot air exhausting through the tops and cool air coming in the bottom.
Did you guys put that film on, or was that already on it?
That was on.
It was on it, yeah.
I'll go in, you go out.
But with storm windows, or with screens rather, very often screens are only at the bottom sash, especially if you have an exterior storm.
Let's
Tree
keep
traffic
that
here.
here.
So
Okay.
a lot of people have abandoned operation of their top sashes.
They turn that around. Well, actually, the other one's on.
Face out.
We see the blaze.
These are unusually large sashes. You know, a typical window pane in Newcastle would be 8 inches by 10 inches. And these are what, like 12 by 20 or something?
That's a 14
14
by 22.
14 by 22. You know, they're huge. You know.
Sometimes that could be a 24 light instead of 6.
Yeah, yes, right.
And that's something I can say, the sash, a lot of times double hung windows are identified with 8/8 or 6/6 or 12/24 or whatever. So this is a 6/6.
These are temporary.
So sashes, or rather windows, were built backwards from the size of the panes available. So if you had an 8-inch pane, and this would be 8 times 3 would be 24 inches, plus the width of these two glazing stobs, which is either 1/4 or 3/16, plus the two stiles, and that gives you the size of your sash. You know, that's they built it backwards from the panes that they were buying. They would never cut panes. And so when we're working on a reconstruction, for instance, and we end up with some odd dimension, we say, no, wait a minute, that's not right, you know, and we'll go back to a standard historic module.
So when you take this away into your special workshop, wherever that's going, I'd love to see that workshop. How long would it take you to get this to a point where it's ready to be put in? I mean, is it 20 hours worth of work? Is it? How much work?
It varies from sash to sash, but you can easily get more than a man-day per sash. A lot of steps. These go and get stripped. Every bit of loose glazing has to be removed, and we take out all the bad glass, and then we have to do the Dutchman repairs, structural repairs. And some of these don't need a lot. Some of them might be rebuilding a corner or a section of it. And these are mortise and tenon together, so that's one thing I have to say. You have to be. Some people, when they say they're going to restore sash, all they do is come in and they cut off a bad section, glue a new piece over it. Really, that takes all the structure out of the window because you've got a mortise and tenon, and you've just cut that joint right off. We tend to like to come back and Dutchman in. We'll recreate the mortise, recreate the tenon. So maybe we might route out 1/3 of this piece. Lay a new one in, that takes care of one side of the mortise, go do the same thing on the other side. So some of them go as far as they're disassembled, they're knocked down, reassembled back together. Others are just simple little Dutchman and repairs, so it varies.
Do you strip with a heat lamp?
Pardon me?
Do you strip it with a heat lamp?
How do you get on
For the most part, no. Generally not, especially if it's got the glass in. It's pretty touchy with the heat lamps if you hit it, you're breaking your glass. We do it a number of ways. They can be chemically stripped, which is just regular chemical paint remover, and that's probably the most common way. We don't have it anymore. We used to have what's called a steam table, and it would actually look like something the size of a pizza oven. And we'd actually steam them, put them in there for a certain amount of time, and completely soften all the layers of paint, and then we scrape it, hand scrape it from there. The steam table works very well. It's a big process, and has a lot of environmental issues too. You're releasing the air paint,